Winning life's battles as a topic that we'll address. When you're a young child and innocent and have not yet faced what we'll call a struggle or a battle of significance. So there's a certain naivete, which I guess is quite refreshing. And then when you face the first time a serious confrontation or battle, it can be very disturbing. You know, what children come home from school and they share with their parents a confrontation they had with a friend or with a teacher, and though we may not always remember the first moments when we experience it, but there's like a transition from a state of pure innocence to a state of realizing that life is more complicated than just a party, just fun. Now, obviously, the most tragic thing of all, therefore, is when a child's life is aborted early and they're thrust into the war zone of life long before they deserve to be, due to abuse, domestic strife, and an environment which is not pleasant. You know, one of the hardest things is for a child growing up. A home is supposed to be a pleasant, peaceful environment. In Judaism, the concept of shalom bayis, it means harmony at home. But when a child comes home and hears parents yelling at each other, now, I'm not talking about an exception once in a while, but it's a constant state of battle. And things are said, as we know in the home, people say things they don't say in the street. Everybody has their defenses down, so to speak. They have to be at best behavior. And children hear everything. They hear a mother's grievances and frustrations and a father's complaints and issues. So if it becomes a consistent thing, what you're basically doing is stripping away from a child the ability to grow up, at least for a certain amount of time, in peace. There'll be plenty of battles to fight once you get to become adults. So it's just another emphasis, which is part of the discussion, of course, of how horrible it is when children are thrust into a battle zone long before they are ready for it. Which is, of course, when we see scenes, actual war. You see children wandering around during the Holocaust, other wars. You see children. It's the most saddest sight to see, because we all know a child deserves the nurturing, protection, to not necessarily be exposed to the harsh, stark realities of battles in life. So both on a physical level and on a psychological, emotional level, these things are they jolt us, because we know children deserve better. It's one thing us adults. Okay, but then we go into the transition. You do end up in a world where you increasingly start recognizing that the world is not there for you and just to do whatever you like. You start realizing people are users, and people want something in return for everything they give. And that type of unconditional love is really almost non-existent. To the point that some of us really become really war-weary from life. How many times have I heard, everyone uses that word, battle, war. I feel life is a war. I feel everything is a battle. At work it's a battle. With my employer it's a battle. With my clients are battles. Then my family, my spouse, my children, fighting, always fighting. So some of us just throw in the towel and say, you know what, okay, whatever, you just give in. Some continue to fight till you get so drained. But the description of life as battle and war obviously is not new. You see it everywhere. That's one of the expressions people use. So as I said, we're not talking about it. Say, even if the childhood was a perfect one, idyllic childhood, the adult life is definitely characterized as battle. I don't know how you would define it. If someone asked you, do you feel like your life is one long series of wars and battles? What would you answer? When I say you, I don't just mean you sitting in this room. I mean everywhere you may be. So I guess people have different answers based on their life experiences. Some people do feel that way. There's no question about it. It doesn't mean that every moment, 24/7, but pretty much a majority of our time. And I didn't even discuss internal battles. I was talking now battles with people, environment, society, the dating scene, for example, courtship. People see it as a form of, I don't know if the word battle is the right word, but there's definitely a a maneuvering and that's necessary. So it may not be battle in the terms of two people with swords in that type of battlefield. It's a more subtle, psychological battlefield, which doesn't make it less of a battle. It just makes it actually more complicated, because it's not like anyone's coming and stabbing you, but there's the subtle manipulations and the subtle maneuverings and the subtle stuff, and you become more vulnerable as you become more emotionally involved in any relationship. And vulnerability makes you even more fragile, and all that comes with that. Then we talk about the voices that haunt us within, for real or imagined. Plot thickens. Don't worry, the end is good news. I'm just pointing first the battle story. So you have the whether it's real or imagined demons that we all have. Many are real, many are not real, many are exaggerated. But that doesn't mean that you don't feel that they're significant. Even if it's a complete imaginary demon or a nightmare, it's still your nightmare, and it affects you, and it debilitates you, and it weakens you. So even if it isn't based on anything, the fact of the matter is it affects your life. So take all this into consideration. Yes, you could pretty much say life is a war. Now there is an expression in the Talmud that says, Kol hadrachim b'cheska sakana. It means all the paths can be assumed dangerous. And when you're on a journey and traveling, you have to assume that paths are dangerous. Why? Because you don't know what's coming. Are there thieves? Are there other forces? Are there wild animals? Are there other environmental stuff? So it's one thing, it's your own comfort zone, your own home. Even that, you don't have complete control, but you could say most control. You could lock the door. But when you're on the road, the Torah looks at it that way. Not to paint a depressing and a negative attitude, it's just to be wary and know that when you live in this world has its dangers. Now, it doesn't mean it's a dangerous world. It means there are dangers that are lurking, and you have to be prudent and wary. At the same time, be prepared for whatever comes your way. Obviously, if no one needs a long explanation to know that if your life is indeed consumed with the sense of battle, wherever you turn, what kind of life are you living? You're living a very drained life, a life that is constantly on the defense in a way, and always second guessing and not knowing what's coming next. As opposed to a proactive life, it's a reactive life. Now, obviously, this is what we're going to address here, this discussion, because how can you turn a life that seems to be a battlefield into something other than that? Maybe you can develop very good battle skills and good training, but I call this like a subtitle for this class, a type of battle training workshop. But is really that the option, to learn how to fight well? Or is there maybe another option? When I say maybe, I mean I'm suggesting that there is an option that you could learn not to become a battler and a fighter. There's ways to transcend the battles of life. That's, of course, what we're leading to. But you have to begin where people are at, where our minds are at and our hearts are at. And for many of us, if not for most of us, life is somewhat of a battle. Again, it may not be a string of series of battles every day, but there's enough battles that get our attention, and it definitely affects us deeply. Now, if we were stripped of a childhood where there was peace and nurturing and comfort, then you could pretty much rest assured that 24/7 you're in battle mode, because that's exactly what happens when a person is in a dangerous situation, especially a child. You develop very sensitive antennae, and you become acutely aware of everything, and everything is potential danger. And it's hard, and you imagine things to be dangerous before you assume everyone's guilty until proven innocent, as opposed to the way it should be, that everything should be peaceful until proven otherwise. So it's one thing to be wary and be prudent and careful. It's another to be living with feeling that any moment you're going to be under attack. And that, unfortunately, is the reality for a number of people in this world. Not due to their own fault, often due to what was done to them, or the experiences of life and so on. And then, as I said, we grow into adults. It is a hostile world, and it's rare to find those type of people who love you unconditionally, where you know that you can trust absolutely that it will never hurt you. Definitely not intentionally, and even unintentionally not. So this is what I want to address, because I think it's a very real topic, and there's a reason I'm addressing it this week. It's not like, we could talk about this any time of the year. Unfortunately, when it comes to wars and battles, there's no relegated month of the year that we're going to have our battles. That's part of the problem. If it was 1 month a year, you could say, okay, that's 1 month, we'll focus on that, and the rest of the time we can be at peace. But battles don't wait for you, and they can't be scheduled. They come. That's part of their problem. Part of their power is that they just come when they want to come. Just as the reason is we are now in the month of Elul, which is the last month of the Jewish Hebrew year, preparing for the new year. So it's a good time to take an accounting of where we're at, and also prepare. We'd like to say that can I enter the new year perhaps less battle weary, less drained, less fearful, and be able to take on life maybe in a new way. So that's number one. Number two, as the Shalah, the great Rabbi Yitzchak Horowitz, the great Shalah of the 17th century scholar, who writes that the chapters in the Torah that we read in every given time have a connection to that time. So indeed, this week's chapter talks about war and battle. That's how it begins. When you will go out to war, to wage war upon your enemies. And then it continues the story of how the laws are around battle and war. I'm going to focus on that first verse. So let's get back to the topic itself. The question really is, and I think this is a critical component to anything, is often our life experiences shape us to the point where we can't distinguish between ourselves and the experience that we've had. As soon as you can distinguish, you're already in control. But when it comes to a point where you can't distinguish between the experience and yourself, that's when usually most of our psychological and emotional weaknesses come into play. So let's say, take a classic example. You're dating someone, you're getting very serious, you think the other person is also serious, and it's moving the right direction. And then the day comes, you suddenly devastating news, the other person is not interested anymore. Whatever reason. And it surprises you because you didn't see it coming. And then you start questioning. So of course, first you get angry at the other person, then you get angry at yourself. You start wondering, and you could end up wondering and being consumed with this, like, what did I do wrong? And at some point, you can become really demoralized by it. Why? Because the rejection, so to speak, has now become your identity. If you had very clarity and say, this rejection was healthy, because I'm not for this guy and he's not for me, or the other way around, not for this girl, it's one thing. But you start personalizing it. You say, what's the matter with me? Is there something that I don't even know about that this person saw? And you begin to identify with the rejection as being like, maybe there's something about me. As opposed to saying I experienced it doesn't mean it's me. Abuse in general, one of the biggest issues is this, where the individual and the experience they have become, the line becomes blurred between your person and the experience. Especially children who don't have the sophisticated tools and the maturity and the so-called space and detachment to be able to distinguish between an experience and themselves will always blame themselves at some point. Which explains the weird phenomenon why you see children of divorce, sadly, blame themselves. And you have to ask yourself, why would someone blame themselves? Two adults didn't get along. Why does a child blame itself for the divorce? It's painful enough that your parents are no longer together and you don't have that wholesome home like other friends that have, and you could sit together on a holiday, on a Shabbat, or whatever it may be, and experience a family life. But why do children blame themselves? So the main reason given by psychologists is because children are truthful and straightforward. They're not complicated in the sense when they see something happening around them, the people they love, they'll never blame the people they love because they want love, they expect love, and they actually idolize the people that love them. For a child, a father is like a god, and a mother is like a goddess. Because this is like the people who brought you into this world. They're the ones that protect you, the ones that nurture you. And a child doesn't know of another reality. That's why children don't have the concept of like leaving home if things aren't going well. Go out for a walk. You'll never hear a child speak that way. I mean, there are at some point children get up to the point they run away from home because it's just intolerable. But it's not a common thing for a young child to just say, you know what, this is abusive, I'm out of here. Why? Because there's nothing outside of this home. The home is the universe for a child. Walking outside the door is like walking off the earth. There's no option like that. It doesn't exist in a child's mind. As I said, unless it's forced and it comes to a point. But at young age, for sure not. At some other age, maybe a little as the child gets older. Because for a child, the whole reality, everything, is my home, is my universe. You don't think in terms of outside of the home. I mean, initial stages of a child's life, you don't even think outside of yourself. A child is an extension of its parents, and that's why you see in the development of every child the first stages of so-called separation, going to school the first time, or having a babysitter for the first time. These are difficult things for a child, because they and their mother, especially the mother, identify as one. Remember, 9 months you were part of that mother, physically and psychologically and emotionally and every possible way. You ate what your mother ate. You drank what your mother drank. There was no life. You breathed the air inside the embryonic environment, and that was your existence. So for 9 months, the psyche of a child has been shaped to be completely part of another person. Then, fine, comes the day of birth, but it doesn't happen in extremes. It's a gradual transition. You cut the umbilical cord physically, but the umbilical cord psychologically is plenty much attached. As a matter of fact, some people still are attached even in their 80s and 90s. Let's not go there right now. But at the young age, and that's fine, because the way God made it in a fascinating way is that a child doesn't just go from one extreme to the other. Here, I'm dependent, and the next thing I know, I'm thrust out into a hostile world, and I'm on my own. Actually, in the animal kingdom, you do find some animals that way, and you find others that are not that way. There are those that within minutes or within days, the parents but they're wired that way. God prepared them for that. But in the human being, it's not that way. It's a slow process. And the child begins to first discovers its fingers, and even explores, starts realizing I'm an identity outside of those around me, outside of my family unit. And this takes time, and we don't know all the secrets of it because we can't really interview young children. It's through observation, through speculation, through extrapolation, so on and so on. So what the point I'm making here is that when you're in that type of situation, so the person you're attached to, who you are part of, something happens, you don't say, oh, they're the problem, I'm not. That's what adults do. We always blame somebody else. Children do the exact opposite. They can't tolerate to hear that my mother or my father are flawed. So they blame themselves. If they're separating, if they're divorcing, it means something's wrong with me. And that's on the, when you talk about abuse or abandonment, and I don't like to bring up painful things, but they are part of our reality, or any form of absenteeism on the side of the parent to a child, the child starts saying, I'm not worth it. How many times do you hear people say, I wasn't worth being loved? It breaks your heart when you hear that. I was not worth being loved. You say, how do you know? Look, my mother wasn't there for me. My father, they didn't protect me. And the abuse goes all around. Even if you're not getting even the person who's not the abuser, but the spouse of the abuser sometimes is seen as even a bigger culprit than the abuser, because why didn't you protect me? You know? Okay, my father abused me, fine. Not fine, let me correct myself. Not fine, but fine. I accept that in a certain way. But he's not healthy. But you were healthy. Why didn't you protect me? Why didn't I deserve protection? And this is not an uncommon statement. And children don't necessarily have the sophisticated language, but their feeling is that. And what happens is you start building up a sense that I'm not worthy. So it's not, you can trace the anatomy of worthlessness to a place. It doesn't happen from nowhere. It happens through a very deliberate and a very series of events that doesn't just come now. Every child naturally will not feel that way. It's only when they're not given what they're supposed to give, like a flower that's not watered will wither. If you see a flower withering, you rest assured that it's lacking nourishment and nurturing. It's not some magic. It's not like some mystery. So I'm saying all of this because it's important to understand why we develop this type of embattled sense of self, because that's what we experienced. Now, I'll go back to the scenario where you grew up in a healthy home where there was peace. But still, you go out into the world is not a peaceful place, as I said. However, the difference is you're empowered. If you did have a stage in your life, there was peace, there was solace, there was calm. So you build up the strength to be able to deal with the battles. It doesn't mean there aren't battles out there, but you have more resources. I'm obviously going to be addressing, and I am addressing both parts. And of course, I don't want to go to extremes. Most people are somewhere in between. Nobody has a perfect childhood, but to say everybody has a completely battle zone childhood is also not true. So something in between, and everybody has to fit it, what I'm discussing here, customize it to your own particular reality. Okay. Now, so here's the key question. If we stop distinguishing, the lines are blurred between your identity and your experience, what do you do about that? If, God forbid, the Jews who were tortured and murdered and saw their families being murdered in the Holocaust, identified with their captors, which you have, what do you have, the Stockholm Syndrome, right, of people identifying with their abusers. And they become close to them in a way. It's a weird phenomenon, but it exists, and you actually become attached to them. So that's a perfect example where your identity is lost in the process, and abuse becomes your reality, and you expect it, and you almost feel you deserve it. The Jewish people did not feel that way. Why? Because when you have a healthy sense of self, just because you suffer doesn't mean you're a sufferer. Just because you've been hurt doesn't mean you are a person that's hurt. No, there are things that happen, and there are things that there are verbs and there are nouns. What is your state of being is the real question. And any healthy intervention of healing from any form of what I'm describing here, the battle weariness of life, requires regaining and reclaiming the self that's independent of the experience. I'm not saying it's easy, because once they become fused into one, it's hard to separate. But we must know that we are not a product of our experiences. It's critical. It's the most critical component in every form of healing. The problem is that we identify with it to the point we can't separate the two. And you look at any type of therapeutic intervention of any form, it's always about regaining the self as opposed to what happened to the self. And people who have a healthy sense of self know how to separate the two. That's why no matter what happens to them, they will never succumb and become a victim, because they don't see themselves as victims. However, children that have been hurt, who don't have the tools, or even adults that are hurt at some point lose the tools, you begin to feel yourself as a victim. So what happens here is another problem. Besides the actual battles that are happening, and let's assume they're real battles, now you've also become to a weakened state where you feel you're a victim of these battles. Now, how could a victim of a battle become empowered to fight a battle? It's almost impossible, because it's a catch-22. It's like saying, you're asking me to go out to fight a battle. I feel like I'm a victim. I feel like I'm at fault or I'm weak. How could a weak soldier fight a battle? So you have yourself this stuck place. You don't feel the strength to fight. So what happens is it becomes a vicious cycle, so you become even more weakened by this situation, to the point, as I said before, either resignation or just denial or escape or numbing yourself one way or other just to relieve yourself of the pain of this whole scenario. I don't even want to mention worse options than that, where a person does destructive things to themselves, but it's all part of a way that we're trying to find a way out of a situation we can't seem to find our way out of. And like it is a scientific statement, a system that created the problem cannot be the system that will solve the problem. So if you are now stuck in this whirlpool, in this vicious cycle of battle, and you're the victim, and that victim makes you weaker, so the battles get stronger, and you're victimized again and again and again, you're part of a situation where it's almost impossible to free yourself, because you're like stuck in a raging sea, and you don't have the power to swim out of it. The only way out, there's the unhealthy ways out. The only healthy way out is you have to figure out that you are not a victim, and you're not a product of what you're seeing. So even though battles may be raging, you are not defined as a battler. which leads us to understanding really who are you, and that's the key to the whole picture. So let's look at this verse in the opening verse of this week's chapter. 2 words, key words, that are such tremendous lessons and timeless lessons that even though it was written thousands of years ago, you'll see in it lies the most profound lessons, psychological lessons of maintaining the integrity and the sanctity of yourself as opposed to the battles that you fight. So the Torah does not deny that there are battles. It says, Kiseitzi l'milchama, you'll go out to wage battle. It's very clear there are battles. It's not the first time the Torah talks about battles. We have battles going from the beginning of time, whether it's between Adam and Eve, between Cain and Abel, between Noah and his children, of course the battles of the flood. I mean, I'm not going to list every battle, but there's plenty of battles. But here's one verse that states it this way. When you will wage war. Now, there's 2 words here that seem odd in the verse. One is it could have, if you know the Bible style is very concise. Every word is accounted for. It's very brief. You could have made this verse could have been a lot shorter. Even though it's short, it could have been even shorter. What do you need the word kiseitse? In English, seitse means when you will go out to wage war. In Hebrew, it could have said kisilcham, when you will wage war. This word seitse, which comes from the word yotzav, vayetze, to go out, seems completely superfluous. The second word that is odd is the next, im eivecha. It says al eivecha. You'll wage war al eivecha. In Hebrew, the word al means upon or above. Al. You say something, al means aliyah, like above something. The Hebrew word for waging war would be wage war im eivecha, or even shorter, be eivecha. Both mean with the enemy. So let's just translate it into English. When you will go out to war upon your enemy. Would anyone say that in an English sentence? Never. You'd say when you will wage war with your enemy. So what do these 2 words indicate? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. Think about it for a moment. They indicate the key to the whole attitude. That real wars and battles are not about fought on battlefields. They're not fought in places. They're fought in minds and hearts and souls of the people that are fighting the battles. And the Torah is telling you the attitude you should take. You never fight wars within. You always go out to fight a war. It's not you. It's not the natural you that's a battler. You go outside of your natural environment to fight a war. Now, you all know in war strategies, the best strategy is never fight a war at your home. Always fight the war in the territory of your enemy. Go out to war. One of the reasons the United States has thrived so much, as people indicate, is because we have not fought wars on this soil. The last war fought on the soil of this earth, of the United States was the Civil War. We're talking about 150 years ago. Is it 150? Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I mean, Pearl Harbor was an attack. Firstly, not on the mainland USA, but it was also not, the war was not fought in Pearl Harbor. It was an attack, and they left. Where was the World War II fought? In Europe, or in the Far East. World War I in Europe, and yes, Europe took years and years and years to rebuild because wars fought on your own soil destroy everything, destroy your resources, destroy your culture, destroy your equilibrium. United States was fortunate not to have to do that. Wars were always fought outside. You always want to fight the war in the enemy's territory. Let them be on the defense, not you. Psychologically, the same is true. Kiseitze l'malcham, as the Torah goes and adds a word that says, remember, you go out to war. You go out of your home, out of your environment, out of your inner space. Battles are fought in the world around us. We'll get back to why that's the case. But it's definitely not to be fought within. And if it intrudes and assaults your inner psyche, you know that you're not fighting the battle the right way. And that leads to the second change in the verse. You are never an equal with your enemy. You're always above your enemy. You're a step ahead, and you're always on the offense because you're not fighting the war internally. You're fighting the war externally, outside. Now, when it comes to you'll find people who are the healthiest type of people, you'll see they fight the least amount of wars. And people wonder why. They're lucky? No, they're not lucky. They know how to preempt, and they never let the war come to them. They always go to it. They're proactive and preemptive. So when you have that type of attitude, that the wars are not you, there's something outside of you, and the enemy is not you, but is not equal to you, but below you, that changes everything. So that's in that context you can say that that real battles are not fought on battlefields, but they're fought in our hearts and souls and our minds. They're fought in our attitude. If you have the attitude of a loser, even if you win a battle or one or two, you'll still be a loser. If you have an attitude of a winner, even if you lose a battle or two, you're still a winner. Because it never defines who you are. You're not a product of your battles. And you're not a product of your conquests or of your losses. People who pick themselves up after their business, let's say, failed, or relationship failed, or other things failed, they pick themselves up and they build upon what they've learned. What are they doing? They're basically saying, I am not defined by what happened. It happened. I'm not happy about it. I learned from my mistakes. But I forge ahead. I am always going to be a winner. Never does an event or an experience, a failure or success, define who you are. But we live in a very mercurial and superficial world, and we are measured by others, and therefore we measure ourselves by superficial successes and failures. You didn't make it, means you lost. You made it, you won. It's not true. You want to see a winner and a loser, you look long term, you look at what they built in their lives. The Jews were seemingly the victims in World War II. And yet today, show me which Nazis have grandchildren who are proud about them, and they bury their faces, even though there was a time where 100 million Germans terrorized Jews. Okay, I'm not going to say everyone was complicit in the actual killings, but complicit through silence. So who at the end of the day is a winner? Pharaoh killed hundreds of thousands of Jews, as did the Babylonians and the Romans and so on. And yet we're here and their grandchildren don't even exist. Or no one even knows who they are. So who's the winner and who's the loser? You don't look at winners and losers based on immediate short-term gains or losses. You look at the big picture. You look at who's standing proud, who's talking about their grandparents and great-grandparents, who is perpetuating a legacy. These are what winners are. But the fact is they may have lost a battle or two, or maybe more than a battle or two. But it never was them. It was what happened to them. It was always not them, never become a victim. You always, something happened to you. This is not you. The challenge, of course, is how do you get to that point where you can actually feel that battles are outside of you and your enemy is never your equal. So, of course, the first step of all is getting to know yourself a little better. Maybe it's time to introduce yourself to yourself. What that means is you may think you're one person, maybe you're not. The first thing you need to know, if you are indeed in a place living in fear or embattled or in some way feeling that battles shape your life, you have to ask yourself this question. Who says that you're so correct about your identity? Why are you so, I don't say the word arrogant, why are you so sure and certain that you know who you are? Maybe you should look at these experiences in life as a wake-up call to figure out maybe it's not who you think you are. So in a way, a strange way, we can become our own worst enemy because we over-identify with our experience, and then we're obstinate in saying, this is me. And then you ask for help, tell me, how can I fix the situation? So I'm just playing an imaginary conversation, and it's actually not imaginary. I've had this conversation hundreds of times, and I say to somebody, okay, you're coming to me to try to help you. So I have to ask you one question. Maybe your premise is wrong. Maybe you don't know who you are. Now, it always comes out a little weird, because then the person will say, yeah, you know who I am. I mean, if I don't know who I am, who knows who I am? I say, yeah, but yes, you're closest to who you are, but you're also the most subjective person on earth about yourself. Because you see yourself from within and not from outside. You ever hear yourself on audio recording of your voice? Does anybody like to hear their audio recording of their voice? Now, I've been speaking my whole life. I've been teaching, and plenty of audio recordings, maybe more than most, thousands. I still don't like to hear myself. Sometimes I listen to myself. I say, who would listen to this guy? And then, you don't hear whatever, because of your diaphragm or whatever it is, you don't hear the voice as you. I don't hear my voice as you hear it right now. That's a fact. And I don't hear your voice the way you hear it. Now, I know I'm doing the speaking, you're doing the listening, but you get the idea. The same is true about our attitudes to ourselves. We don't know ourselves. It's not true. We don't know ourselves. Yes, of course, you know more facts about yourself than I would know, because you lived it. You can tell me where you were born, where you grew up. But I'm talking about knowing yourself in an internal way, in a real way. Like, what are you made of? Now, you know plenty, but there's one blind spot, and that's your subjectivity. Because if indeed you have over-identified with your experiences, have become forces that have shaped and defined who you are, you're going to be the last person that can distinguish that, because you're the one that made that blurring of the lines. So I always say to people, I'm saying obviously in a sensitive way, I say, look, I'm not here to challenge your self-awareness, but if you want me to be of help, if you want anyone to be of help, the first question you have to ask yourself, maybe I can help you see yourself in a new light. Maybe you're not a product of everything that's happened to you. And I remember someone telling me, it was so sad, we both laughed. The person said, don't tell me that, it's not true, I am a product of everything. So I said, there you go. So you're telling me now, I tell you you're not a product, you tell me you are a product. Who knows better? Well, you know better what you've done to yourself. That I agree, but you don't necessarily know better who you are. Because you don't even know how to distinguish between who you are and what's happened to you. So, how do we get beyond this quagmire here? That's the question. So the answer is yes, you need someone that you can trust. In this context, if you do find a mentor who cares about you and you feel you can trust, so maybe you should give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're making a good point, that maybe you don't know who you are entirely. You know what's happened to you. You know how you feel about yourself. You know how self-loathing and low self-esteem you may have, but you don't know about a part of yourself that maybe has gone undercover, that has not been able to ever emerge because you become so over-identified with your pain and with your negative experiences that you can't recognize that inner self. Some call it the inner child. And you need someone to help you recognize your own self. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to lose. It's not a matter of pride. On the contrary, it's a feeling of redemption, because we're talking about reclaiming. At the end of the day, nobody can help someone who's not going to help themselves. But sometimes you need someone just to illuminate. Just like a good coach. What does a good coach really do? Good coach can't create talent. If you don't have the talent, no one's going to be able to instill it in you. A good coach takes a talent, whether it's a musical talent, an athletic talent, another form of talent, and helps you firstly get beyond the blind spots, bad habits, things you're doing that are not letting your talent really fully express itself. So what a good coach does, because of their objectivity, can help you discover yourself. You're not discovering the coach, and you're not discovering something that you're not. But yes, you need the psyching up, you need the pep talk, you need the push, the challenge to bring the best out of you. That's what a good coach does. Now, what's expected of you, who's being coached, is to be receptive to that. You may fight, you might kick and scream, but if you're not receptive, where are you going to go? And who's losing in the process? Not the coach, you are. So yes, you need to find someone you can trust. And you need to find someone that you invite into your life, and you invite them to kick you in the butt, pardon the expression. That's what you need. Because nobody wants to do it on their own. You have to invite them in. And even then, anyone that really cares about it doesn't want to do it, but sometimes it's necessary to do it. And I mean in a positive and a loving way. No different than drill sergeants who train you in a boot camp, or piano teachers who make you crazy until you get the discipline right, or tennis teachers, trainers that teach you the right moves. This is what's necessary to achieve excellence. Now you could choose and say, you know what, I prefer the less painful approach. Less painful approach can either lead to mediocrity, or worse, that you'll be stuck in your place the rest of your life. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because that's the alternative. So that's what it comes down to. So the Torah is saying it exactly as it's to the point. Wars are not about you, and enemies are not your equals, period. You don't agree? Okay, who are you to disagree? How much do you know about yourself? How much do you know about reality? That's the statement. Now, how can we have such confidence? The confidence comes from a very simple premise. Go to the beginning of the Torah and you'll see. You are created in the divine image, and you're a piece of God. However one explains that theologically. You're not just some type of leaf in the wind that's completely controlled by the wind and by other elements. You are a soul. You're not a body traveling on a spiritual experience, having a spiritual experience. You're a soul having a physical experience. That's the premise. Now, if one does not believe in that, or does not accept that they have that soul, then they are more or less going to become a victim of circumstances, or a product of circumstances. So the fundamental principle that allows one to say, kiseitse, you're going out to war, and the enemies are not your equals, is because it's an understanding of who you really are. So if it really comes down to, get to know yourself. And yourself is the soul, not the rest of you. And I can tell you, just for myself, my own experience, or what I've heard from others, when you get to know your soul, you get to know a person you've never met before. Because we are products of what we've been told. In this world, we're told that your value is based on your financial status, based on your looks, based on your youth, on your productivity, your buying power, your equity. Go down the list. Who hasn't done, how many people, what's your credit rating? As if that's your biggest identifier of the value of your life, my credit rating. Basically, your self-worth ends up becoming defined by your net worth. And if it's not financial, it's your possessions, what you own, who you know. That type of sense of self that's not dependent on any material factor, most of us are not familiar with that individual. Because we grew up in homes, we grew up in schools and environments that do not teach us of that inherent value. Now I go back to the child. If you grew up in a healthy home where the children and parents loved you unconditionally, and it was not based on their expectations and based how well you did at school, or based on what kind of job you took, whether it made them happy or not, whether it made them look good or not, then if you had a home like that, then they, whether they know it or not, inadvertently cultivated and nurtured your soul, that you are valuable independent of anything else. I don't want to repeat the story I've said so many times, the woman in St. Louis. Birth is God saying you matter. You matter simply because you were put here on this earth for a purpose. Everything else is secondary. So, if you did not grow up in such an environment, then rest assured your identity is defined by the things that the people around you valued. And that may have been intelligence, making them proud, credentials, equity, as I said, status, and the list goes on. I'm not suggesting that status and money and all the other things doesn't have value, but it's not your core value. That adds value. Obviously a person, a very secure, healthy person, has resources. Of course, they'll use them well, and great. It's a blessing. But if you're defined by your resources, so we come out naked in this world, come out of our mother's womb naked. Everybody. You don't come out with a set of any type of special suits or designer clothing. You come out naked. I don't mean that in a sexual way. I don't mean it in even a physical way. I mean you come out who you are. This is the beautiful child that was just born. And no accoutrements. There are no props. There's no background. No furniture. There's no packaging. Here is who you are. And your mother, hopefully, and father welcome you into this world, pure love. They don't need anything else, just you. You, as you are valuable. No one knows what you're going to become. We don't know what kind of talents you have. We don't know anything. You as you, that's the most beautiful, unconditional acceptance of a human being. Now, if parents and society and communities and schools would continue with that attitude, we would have a healthy world. We would have a Mashiach here, frankly. Because every human being on earth would be valued just for who they are, not for what they do for somebody else, or what they accomplish, or they produce, etc. And on the contrary, when you're secure with who you are, then what you produce also comes in a healthy way. So I'm not suggesting we just sit around, do nothing, and I'm valuable even if I do nothing. On the contrary, someone with healthy self-esteem is going to do a lot because it's going to come from within. It's not because they have to perform or they have to please anybody. It's an internal thing. The reason I'm talking about it in this purest form, because by contrast, then let's look at where we are. Where most of us are, we don't have that. We may have sometimes a sense of that. Comes Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. If you're following the 60 Days book that I've composed, that we have the daily emails that you can get, you'll see a lot of the underlying message in many of those. And this journey is about self, reclaiming yourself. And Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, the purest moment, especially the end of Yom Kippur, is all about the core you. Who's the core you? If you strip all the layers, what do you get to? The essence of your soul. So the more you can connect to that, the more likely you're going to free yourself from being a victim and a product of your environment. Now, is it an easy process? I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a very exhilarating and very empowering and very loving, a very joyous journey. It's not a painful journey because you're going to discover beautiful things. Now, I've been told a number of times when I've said this to people, they said, you say I'm going to discover beautiful things. I'm afraid to go on this journey because I think I'm going to discover very ugly things. What does that tell you? As soon as someone tells you that assumption, where's that coming from? How do you know? Because that's how you see yourself. So of course you're in a battle all the time. You are your own enemy. Of course you're in battle. You're saying that you're afraid you're going to discover the ugliest thing. I remember once someone telling me, I asked them a question, I forgot what was the context about life. So I said, when's the last time you cried? The person said, I haven't cried in 30 years. Because my father told me when I was 7, 8 years old, I cried, somebody hurt me. He says, only babies cry. You never cry in my presence again. So I became afraid to cry. I thought to be tough means you don't cry. So I said, what happened, do you think? So the person said to me, correct. I said, the tears that I should have cried have been bottled up for so many years that if I start crying now, I'll never stop. So I don't want to go on this journey. Too painful for me. So I say, yeah, you may cry, but no, it will stop. And you know what? You'll discover that beneath all those tears that you've bottled up is a beautiful soul that never emerged. Now, of course, it's terrifying to hear that. That wasn't just some type of academic discussion. Because if you really feel that way, it's very hard to... But it's important to state the facts. There's a beautiful part of you that's deeper than the ugliness that you perceive. Even if it's some truth to it, it's not who you are. And that's the key. How do you separate between who you think you are and who you actually are? Which goes back to what I always say, that when you ask people, who are you? They give you their business card, which is at best what they do, not who they are. You tell me you have a business card that tells me who you are? That would be nice. God can tell you who you are. No business card is going to tell you who you are. Business cards say what you're good at, what you do, what you make your living. So the question then is, the key then is to get to understand and learn about your soul, which is essentially, ultimately, the beauty of studying. I'll say it in the Torah language. It's called Chassidus. You study Chassidic thought. You study the blueprint of your soul. What does your soul look like? And most people say, one second, there's books that talk about my soul. Yes, there are books that talk about your soul. So just like there are medical books that talk about your body and break down the anatomy of the body and the different parts and limbs and organs and inner forces at work and the cellular, biological and chemical structures of all our systems, including the neurological ones and the circulatory and so on. There are, yes, books that elaborate pages upon pages on the dynamics and the anatomy of a soul. I don't do this in a systematic way every week in the class, but in bits and pieces, I talk about it all the time. The 5 dimensions of the soul, starting from the biological, to the emotional, to the intellectual, to the transcendent, to the unifying, which is Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida, how each soul is made up of 10 forces, faculties, 3 intellectual, 7 emotional. It's called the spheres. Then there's the whole superconscious part of our spirits, which is in the Kabbalistic terminology, keter, keser, like the crown. And this goes into elaborate detail. The more you study it, the more you get to know yourself. And you suddenly see, hey, I never knew it was part of me. No surprise. What do we really know about ourselves? How much do we know about our brain? Even the rest of the systems, we know not much. We know a lot more than we used to know. But what do we know about this little body, this little person inside of you? This 5-6 foot structure, 150 pounds. We never go higher than that. So what do we know? We know more about outer space and what's going on under the oceans than we do often about what's going on underneath here. That's not so complicated. This is far more complicated and also, of course, far more subjective, which goes back to the blind spots that I described earlier. But there are places to study about this. And when better time to do so? When we're in an introspective month, a month of accounting, a month of trying to get deeper understanding ourselves. And frankly, what more enjoyable thing there is there in life than to learn about yourself? I don't mean as an ego trip, but simply to learn about what makes you tick. To me, that's like, if you had choices, wouldn't that be the number one thing you want to do? But again, we're products of our environment, and we're busy, and we find all kinds of other things that are part of our habits and routines and patterns. And someone say, why don't you want to find out a little about yourself? I'm too busy. I just saw a cartoon. Someone sent me a cartoon. This guy with a suitcase, he's on his way to work. He stops at his local guru on some mountain and says, okay, can you tell me what life is about in 10 minutes? Because I have a meeting at 9:15. That's how we look sometimes. So yeah, you want to know the meaning of life, but you have a whole life. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. So we are a big part of the problem, let's be honest. Because we are battling life, and a battler is very hard for you to stop and just step back and experience something that's not a battle. It's actually what Shabbat is supposed to be like. 6 days of the week you battle, and the 7th day you rest. Not just physical rest. It means you go back into your inner soul that's not engaged with battle with the world around you. Now I should add, it's not really a footnote, it's probably a key point, but of course the obvious question is, why then God makes battles? Why do we have these battles? Why are all the paths dangerous? And why do we enter a world where we have to face? So that gets into the purpose of existence, which is that we're here to transform the world, this hostile world, into a place of peace. The problem becomes when we become part of the problem. When we were sent as agents to bring peace into this world, to bring harmony, and we now ourselves part of the problem because we are now the battlers. So this is the paradox of what we're taught. What's the paradox? That on one hand, we're sent to this world. Kiseitse, we're sent. Vayetze Yaakov. We leave our core spiritual space to enter a hostile world with a full awareness that it's outside of who you are, and therefore you have the power to transform it. Because your enemies are not your equals, you're above them, you're here to transform them. The dilemma I've been addressing is what happens when you get caught into the trap and you suddenly feel you're now not the one that's coming to bring solutions, you're part of the problem. That's why we need to remind ourselves, and that's why we're here to remind each other, that no, you were not sent here to be a battler. You were sent to transform a battle zone. But you are always meant to be a step above it, because it's not who you are. Those souls in life, in history, and there are people, you may have met some of them, I've met them for sure, who their lives, they engage in this world, but they're not made of this world. They engage in this world and they always realize that this world is there to be transformed into something of harmony. So they may engage in battles, but they will never be the battler. You'll see there's an inner peace such people carry. Even when they're facing challenges, they never lose their inner core. Like the words that I always repeat from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he was in the heart of the abyss, in the belly of the beast, the worst times under Stalin, and they were torturing him and oppressing him, and he had no recourse, there was no due process. And they pointed a gun to his head because he refused to cooperate, and said to them, and they said to him, this gun has made many a man cooperate. And he turned to them with the deepest calm and said, this toy, in Yiddish tzatzke, can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. And then the Jewish captor, who was a Jew, whose grandfather was a chassid of this Rebbe's grandfather, said to him cynically, he said to the Rebbe, yeah, Rebbe, we'll see who prevails. I'm the one with the gun. And the Rebbe again calmly turned to him and said, yes, we'll see who prevails. Who will prevail? And that man was shot within a few months, which was always the case in that type of environment. And that Rebbe, with all his wounds, came out of prison, came out of Soviet Union, came out of Europe, ended up here in the United States. And I wouldn't be sitting here today talking about it if he didn't have that inner composure. And he was not an exception. He was an exception in his time. But through the generations, we've had people like this, and you all have grandparents somewhere down the line that were that way. It's an inner peace, like the eye of the tornado, even though the battles are raging. It could be storms raging and battles raging, but it's not you. He knew where he was. As a matter of fact, when they asked him, do you know where you are? Which is, of course, they wanted to say, you're under our authority, you're under our power. He says, I know where I am, yes. I'm in a place that is absolved of having a mezuzah on the door, which is actually an insult. You know, in the house you put a mezuzah on every door except which one? The bathroom. Or a stable. Because it's not a place of humans living there. So this is the way he turned and said, yes, I know exactly where I am. So it wasn't about insulting them, it was a man that you're not going to intimidate, because his power of spirit was more powerful than their worship of materialism. And that's simple as that. And as I said, there's no question who would survive. And this is the story of the Jewish people throughout history. All the enemies, all the empires, much greater. The Roman Empire, greatest empire in history, some say. Where are they today? The Jewish people were exiled, the temple was destroyed, they were dispersed, murdered, pillaged. And here we are talking about it. 670 years ago, there was a Holocaust, which everybody could have written off and said the final obituary in the Jewish people, that they wouldn't exist after a few more decades. And here we are. Because you see, spirit is not vanquished by weapons. And spirit cannot, like light, cannot be overwhelmed by darkness. Light always dispels darkness. A little light dispels a lot of darkness. They're not equals. It's alevecha. When it comes to fire and water, so enough fire can evaporate large bodies of water. And enough water can extinguish the greatest fires. They are equal adversaries. And it's just a matter of who's more powerful. Light and dark, think about it for a moment. You could have the darkest of dark rooms. You just light a little flame. It's not strong enough to light the whole room, but in the area that it lights, there's no battle. It naturally and automatically dispels any darkness near it. The flame gets larger, you'll dispel more darkness. There's no battle. So what is light? What's the nature of light? Light is the perfect example of the soul. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. The soul of a human being is the light of God. It enters into a dark world. So there's a battle. The darkness is a battle. But light is not a battler. Light just needs to shine. And automatically darkness is dispelled. But what happens if the light convinces itself it's not light? It's like fire and water. Okay, you're dark, I'm this, we're two equals. Light always knows that it has a source and is going into a state of darkness. It's going outside of itself to illuminate darkness. And it knows it's not an equal. That's the consciousness we need to learn. Light consciousness. That we are lights, we are flames. Yes, we enter a world of wicks, and we enter a world of darkness, and we enter it in order to illuminate, but never think you're part of it. You're forced to change things, to transform things. Everything in existence is part of the clockwork of nature, except the human being. We have clockwork. We need to sleep. We have needs. We need to eat and drink. But when it comes to moral choices, we can do things that change the course of destiny. Animals cannot do that. The sun and moon can't do that. The stars can't do that. Nature does not do it. Nature runs its course. beautifully. But it's the human that can come in and be an agent that can take a dark scenario and bring light there. Unfortunately, also the opposite. So when you think of it that way, that light is not battling darkness, it's above, it's upon its enemy. And it's outside of itself, because light is light. Where there's light, there's only light. There's no darkness in the place of light. But it goes out of itself to enter a dark place in order to bring light there. That's the purpose of our lives. The more you study, the more you connect to this light that is your soul, the more you're aware of it, the more you become, you can reclaim it. And the more you reclaim it, you become less of a product and victim of the darkness that has shaped you. It's a very straightforward formula. Now, it's difficult in one way because you have to do something, but at the end of the day, it's not that difficult, because what you're doing is just discovering a part of yourself that you just were not aware of. And studying it is one half of it, learning about it, and secondly is acting on it. That's why you'll find in Judaism, you'll find so much emphasis on lighting candles, Friday night candle, Hanukkah candles, holiday candles, the menorah in the temple. Even when we remember a lost one, it's through lighting a candle. So next Friday night, when you light a candle, you light a flame, don't just do it by rote, mechanically. Why don't you think about it? You have the power to light a flame, and whatever darkness is in your home or in your life, even though it may not be physically dark because you could have electricity on, but psychologically or spiritually, emotionally dark, you are changing things. That's why one of the reasons that the lighting of candles, Shabbat candles, is about Shalom Bayis. So the Talmud and the Code of Jewish Law says why? Because when you light a candle, you can see Lo Yikoshel Be'etz above, you can see that you shouldn't slip over a piece of wood or a stone. In the olden days, people had stones and they lived in places that they had things that could slip over. So the flames created a peaceful environment. But that's a very nice statement. The question is this. Today we don't have stones and wood in our homes. We have carpets, we have tiles, we have very beautiful environments, and then we have electricity. So obviously this is a far more profound statement than just light. We're not talking about lighting up electricity. There's the holiness of Shabbat Kodesh, Leil Shabbos Kodesh. You're lighting a holy candle, and we're not talking about a stone and a wood only physically. We're talking about the psychological and emotional and other type of blockages that all of us have. And it's only a holy light that can dispel it. If you light it Thursday night, you don't have that. And if you light a light bulb, you don't have it. There's something about the natural flame. And it's meant to ignite the natural flame of your soul. That's what we're looking for, the natural flame of who you really are. So it's time to start revisiting and discovering who you are. It's an invitation. It's an invitation. Come discover yourself. How about that? That's what the month of Elul and Tishrei is all about. Come discover yourself. And you'll be surprised to find out something really beautiful, someone you can really love. So if you don't like everything about yourself, that's because you don't know everything about yourself. No, people like to say, I like to meet some friends, some new friends I can love, I can care about. Maybe the first person is to meet yourself and become your own friend and love yourself in a new way. And I mean that in a humble way. I don't mean in an arrogant way. So that's the lesson, my friends, of Kiseitze L'Mochama Alevecha. Going out to battle, realizing we're not battlers, realizing that we are fundamentally champions and we are winners. And even if there's times that we may have a setback, that doesn't make you less of a winner. Because your identity is not defined by your gains and losses, it's defined by your attitude. It's defined by who you are. Sometimes God will send us a challenge that may be very difficult. But you don't in any way get demoralized or disturbed by that, because it means that, I have the strength to do it. That's a blessing. Now you have to find that strength, and you have to find people that affirm and confirm and validate that strength. And with that type of attitude and approach, you can really, nothing stands in the way. Nothing stands in the way. So, may God bless everybody in this month of Elul with that ability to discover yourself and time to fall in love with yourself in a good way. You know, a little in a healthy way. And as you imagine, the more in love you are with yourself, the more love you'll be able to give to others. You don't like yourself, it's very hard to like another person. It may be a short-term escape or a type of compensation, but it's not really going to work. So, I hope to be able to see you in the next week or next time we meet, or wherever you may be in the world, and see somebody that's just shining and glowing in new ways, and even your body language and your posture. Now you carry yourself with a sense of self-respect and esteem, and know you're sent here by God, chosen, hand-picked to enter the fray, enter the world of battles, with the full confidence that you can win any battle that comes your way, because you're not of it. You're just here, but you're not made of it. So with that, may I bid everybody wish everyone a beautiful week. And until next Wednesday, 8:15, 8:30, look forward to see you, whether it's on Facebook or on YouTube, on all the other platforms and channels that we're broadcasting. And it should be a very blessed year. And we will continue next Wednesday. If you want to get those 60-day emails, I think the 60-day journey is a great way to achieve what we're discussing here, traveling back into yourself and finding yourself. Just subscribe. It's a free subscription. It's an excerpt of the 60-day book. The book, of course, is available. I was just told that it became a #1 bestseller on Amazon without any real effort, so I guess it has its own life. And any other way that we could be of help, please stay in touch with us. Be well, everyone. Bye-bye. Okay.
What would you say is the bigger problem with YouTube as opposed to Facebook?
I don't know if there's a problem. Facebook is extremely easy to do video. All you got to do is press a button on the phone. YouTube needs some more systematic.
You mean like uploading it or getting more views?
No, getting views. No.